ladies and gentlemen, hosses and hossettes. Welcome back to Battle Royale Mod Close Emitter, the greatest series in all of gun tubing, hosted by the most goodest BS gun tuber this side of the Mississippi. Mailbox season, it is here to stay, and we are about to crown which of your spam mail holding devices does it best. Friendo, this is 110 SAS Actual, and it's an honor to be in your presence. Gentlemen, this little page here has nearly doubled in size over the past couple of months, and that's absolutely all thanks to you guys. It's been an absolute blast interacting with everyone, meeting new folks, and getting the feedback that you guys are just enjoying watching me being a goober here on YouTube and Instagram. The interwebs is a wild place, and it's been a fun little ride here, but we ain't stopping now. Gentlemen, I want your help. Let's absolutely blow this thing up. Let's grow this thing so big so we can destroy pink SR25s on the daily. Let's make unpaid for opinions great again. Let's make objective info cool again. Let's make gun tubing entertaining and factual again without garbage products being shoveled down your throats in exchange for a check in the mail. My content is for the boys, and gentlemen, I serve this small little community here to the best of my ultra low IQ ability. I'm not out here with my hand out panhandling for a few bucks a month from you guys to buy some sort of prescription. Yeah, definitely prescription. I ask not what you can do for SAS, but what SAS can do for the community. So, gentlemen, hit that little subscribe button, pop in a comment for the algorithm gods, and turn on notifications because Battle Royale Mod Close Emitter engaged. So the series finale, destination, we have arrived. We have gathered the best of the best in closed emitter red dot sights. We have the Trijicon RCR, the aimpoint acro P2, the Steiner MPS, lead and steel PV3 Holosun 509T, and the Sile Bear. Sile, I don't know, Sile China Bear, that's whatever it is. These optics are all from the absolute biggest names in the industry, and they're about to go head to head. And in the end, only one optic will wear the crown of greatest closed emitter red dot pistol sight on the market. So, gentlemen, we've broken this down into a few categories. Some categories that I feel, and along with your guys' feedback, say are the most important and most crucial to what makes a pistol dot great. Now, the winning optic, it needs to excel at pretty much everything. The winner needs to be clearly ahead of the pack with very few exceptions. Together, with your votes, we've decided that durability and reliability, glass quality in the field of view that they display, quality of the dot and the reticle, and the key factor most chosen by you guys is how much drip does it have and how Gucci it's going to look on your unfired weapons. No, I'm kidding. Listen, I'm a man of the people, and if the people need to know my expert opinion on Gucci points or a piece of kit, you know, how good it's going to get you in the flexes on the internet, whatever, I guess I gotta weigh in on that as well. My opinion, not so expert, but I'll give it a shot, guys. Now, with each of these broad categories, there are going to be a few more points that go into them, but to keep it most simple and not steal a decade of your life here with this video, I'll be as thorough as possible when breaking them down, but we're not going to get in here talking about flux, capacitors, motherboard capabilities, and so on and so forth of each dot. I'm going to be honest, I don't care about all of that, and you probably don't either. I just need to know, is it going to go bang? Well, is it going to stay lit for as long as I make the gun go bang, and is it going to perform absolutely excellent? So, gentlemen, without further ado, let us commence upon this great crusade. So first, let's talk about the glass quality in the field of view each optic displays. Now, why is this important? Well, at surface level, obviously it's important to see what the heck you're trying to pull the trigger at. But exactly what makes some glass better than others? If I can see through it, it's fine, right? Well, I mean, yes, but mostly no. Having an ultra crisp sight picture with as much uninterrupted field of view as possible is a very key component that goes into what makes some optics great and some looking like a paper straw that sat in your cup for like 2 days, making your Sprite drink, you know, taste all cardboard-like and is swollen up so tight that it feels like you've been smoking cigarettes for 69 years trying to get that delicious delivery of crispy McDonald's Sprite. When you look through your optic, you need to know exactly what is there on the other side. It's not only safer, but to the dudes that trust their lives on these things, it's a very crucial aspect. Cheap garbage glass that you're going to struggle to find a sight picture, or it's going to look like you're looking through a fishbowl, isn't going to help you maximize your performance. In fact, you're going to have a bad day while your paper targets don't even break a sweat. Now, as far as field of view goes, it's incredibly important to have the largest, most least interrupted area possible, not only for your situational awareness, but recovery of your reticle and sight picture as well. Think about when you're, say, shooting a pistol match or simply transitioning from target to target. Sometimes you just lose your sight picture. I'm guilty of it, but that's because I probably suck. And I'm sure the greatest of greats in pistol shooting have it happen to them as well. Where that large field of view comes into play is giving you more slack, giving you more room for error, and helping you catch that dot quicker and where it's at in your sight picture, and helping you make the proper adjustments to getting that dot on target. I don't know how many times I've been shooting either static at a target from draw to get fast, accurate rounds on target, or shooting targets while I'm on the move. You know, one's over here, the other is a 180, only to have to stop and do the damn hokey pokey with my handgun trying to find my dot. Meanwhile, I'm out here looking like it's my first day behind a gun. A larger field of view will undoubtedly help you find that dot quicker so you can go to work in the event you lose your sight picture. Now, the real answer here is to train more, become more proficient in acquiring your sight picture. Yes, absolutely. That's always the best answer. But hey, I'm not John Wick. Probably you aren't either. And I'm going to ask for as much help as I possibly can. So, gentlemen, let's start with the Trijicon RCR. The RCR is the newest closed emitter to the game here. Trijicon announced these optics in early 2023, and it's been a very slow rollout. It's actually been pretty difficult to get my hands on this one. It's been dropping in very limited quantities, so I had to scoop one up when I could. So my first impressions are, it feels pretty much identical to the legacy RMR, except the dot has been trapped, of course, in the glass case of emotion. In fact, I'd say that's the best way to describe it. Now, it's not identical. The glass absolutely is not as wide as the RMR, but it's very, very close. It's the same profile. However, it appears just trimmed a touch on the sides. And they made the width just a little less than the legacy RMR, which I definitely don't appreciate, but it's not the end of the world because it is a very small difference. Glass quality, it's pretty ideal. It's a very crisp sight picture. Edges on objects looking through the glass are very sharp. The field of view, it's fair, it does all right. It's certainly not making me feel like I'm looking out my back window, but it's very solid. Something I'd like to add, that it does have some bluish hue to it, which doesn't bother me really at all, but it does come, to play in my brain just a little bit. Some of you guys really hate that blue hue. I just want to add it for you guys because to me, it doesn't really matter, but I want to do that for you. Now, every pistol dot in the lineup here is going to have some sort of fisheye, some sort of distorted sight picture. Some have it way worse than others, and some are hardly noticeable. There's a touch of fisheye here with the RCR, but it's definitely not significant. Overall, the Trijicon RCR does very well in this category. Moving forward, let's talk about the aimpoint acro P2. The P2 is the most mailbox of all mailboxes that ever were mailboxes. Add a flag to this bad Larry and USPS will pull up and deliver absolutely nothing to this thing. Instead, just mark your package delayed. You have pretty much a little square peephole here. Now, for what the P2 does well, it makes up for doing things pretty awful. Now here's the thing, the glass quality, it's very ideal. It's bright, it's crisp, it's very flat. There's very little fisheye effect here, not to mention very little bluish tint, which gives you a brighter window. However, out of all the lineup, the P2 is pretty much tied for dead last when it comes to field of view. If there was an optic that would most resemble looking through that paper straw we talked about earlier, it would be the aimpoint acro P2. Guys, it's pretty much abysmal. There were only two optics I legitimately found myself searching for the red dot significantly more often than any other out of the lineup, which was the acro. To put it simply, this optic turns the difficulty just kind of up a notch when it comes to speed of shooting, transitions, and shooting from a draw. It's simply just much harder to find that dot than most in the lineup. There were times I legitimately found myself looking like a clown with this thing, searching for that dot. Now, while it's probably the most minimalist and slim, sleek profile in the lineup, that came with just way too much sacrifice in my opinion. And honestly, at times, it hinders my ability to shoot like crap still, but making me much slower shooting like crap. Moving forward, we have the Steiner MPS. If there was one optic that the Space Force would adopt for pistols, this would definitely be it. It honestly looks kind of silly. I mean, It's not that bad, but I do feel like it's definitely a Punisher skull away from being a China Bing Bong Bango special. But guys, that's subjective. However, objectively, the glass in the Steiner, it's pretty top tier. Some of the least amount of fisheye in the lineup, hardly any blue tint to top it off. It has a very nice little rectangle viewing area. It's tall, it's wide, it's simple, and it's very straightforward to run and gun with. The glass quality feels extremely similar to the aimpoint, but it gives you considerably less of that tunnel effect that you get with the aimpoint. Steiner did a great job on the glass. I really don't have much to complain about. Next in the lineup is the all-new lead and steel PB3. And again, kind of subjective, but it's a little goofy looking. Could definitely see it on a ray gun. However, just like the Steiner, ray gun optics just have this trend of having huge glass. The Pandora's box is a very nice rectangle window. It's tall and it's wide. Glass quality, it's pretty crisp with minimal fisheye. The only downfall, which in my opinion isn't a big deal at all, it's partially kind of tinted, meaning the top line of your sight, let's call it the top 75%, essentially has zero blue hue to it. But at the bottom 25, it kind of transitions into that bluish kind of hue. This is absolutely not a deal breaker in my opinion. Again, I just want to note this stuff for you guys, for the guys who can't do blue. Now we have the Sealay Bear, Sealay Cycle, I don't know, Sealay. This is our budget level entry, straight off the boat from China, but hey, it was cheap, so why not see if it's worth it? Essentially, what we have here is an aimpoint P2 sight picture. In fact, it kind of feels like that's their idea behind this optic, is cloning the P2. Feels tight and very just meh, except it's not as crisp as that P2, nor is it as bright with a touch more fisheye. It's not ideal, however, it's a fraction of the cost, so we're here for it. The little engine that could. Finally, we have the Holosun 509T, also fresh off the SS Beijing. We have our beloved Batsuit Special. Now, Holosun does have a pretty great size profile and also glass. It's wide and it's tall, helping you find that reticle that's lost its way. Holosun does a great job of it. However, there's a significant amount of fisheye when it comes to the Holosun. While you're not going to get that tunnel effect of, say, the P2 as easily, you're going to have an image that it just isn't like looking out your back window. Objects in the sight picture feel like sometimes they're just at a 1.1 magnification in the center, and the further you get to the edges, it feels like a 0.9 magnification. Well, it gives you a slight advantage in field of view, having that convex kind of sight picture and glass. It really starts to play tricks on my brain after a while. Now, you can train past this, in my opinion, again, but why play on a higher difficulty? Why not make things as easy as possible? So, to conclude on glass quality and field of view, let's start at the bottom. Coming in at number 6, we have the Sealay Bear. It's serviceable, but you're playing on extreme mode, let's be honest here. At number 5, we have the aimpoint P2, a very tight and narrow sight picture that causes a tunnel effect. It leaves you with much less room for error during your pistol presentation and also those transitions. Coming in at number 4, we have the Holosun. You have a solid sight picture, it's wide and it's tall, but it's rather bluish and that fisheye effect is very real. If it wasn't as wide as it is, it would probably be close to the bottom of the list because it absolutely has the most fisheye out of the entire lineup. Now, breaking into the top 3, we have the Trijicon RCR. Sight picture and field of view, it's pretty daggone good. However, it's just not the greatest. Glass is very crisp and clean. However, it does have some of that bluish hue. Simply put, it's very middle of the road. Excellent glass, but some just do it a touch better. Number 2 is almost a tie with number 1. However, it's at a slight disadvantage in crispness of glass, and that's the PB3. Lead and steel really does a great job at everything, really. It's the largest field of view out of the entire lineup. It's huge, makes dynamic shooting, transitions, shooting from a draw much easier, and gives you some room for error. The only real thing that held it back from being number 1 in this category is simply it's just a touch less crisp than the Steiner MPS. So, number 1, yes, the Steiner MPS. Very, very crisp glass, very flat image that feels like you're looking out your back window. It's wide and it's tall. Steiner does a fantastic job at glass here. Well done. Now for the next segment. Let's talk about dot quality and the reticle. Having a dot that's bright and crisp is very important to shooting fast and shooting accurately. While having a good dot isn't going to make you inherently a better shooter and replace getting those reps in at the range. It will allow you to excel and maximize your capabilities. Your dot needs to be visible at a UV index of 1000, but you also need to be able to crank it down so you're not burning out your eyeballs when you go to draw in low light conditions. Now with night vision getting into the hands of folks more and more often, you see it popping up a lot more often than you did just a year ago. A good red dot needs to have nods capabilities, as well as not washing out your tubes while aiming your dot, so you need to have some adjustability. Your dot needs to be crisp enough to not look like a distorted bunghole and leave you guessing where dead center is at, leading to potentially missed marks while you're shooting. And the thing is, the further away you get from your target, the more magnified this issue will become. For you dudes that like to shoot like 200 yards with your handgun, it's me, I'm guilty. A good crispy dot is simply just more gooder. Now obviously guys, shooting 200 yards with your handgun isn't a very ideal scenario. It's just a good bit of fun. But 50 yards? Sure. Those plate racks in Texas Stars, even at 25 yards, can prove very difficult if you just have a giant blob that's not crisp. So essentially, we're measuring this on brightness, how crisp it is, and how adjustable it is, so you can dial in to that perfect setting for all conditions that you may experience. Basically, you don't have high, medium, and low volume on your TV, so why should you have it on your optic, and why should that be any different? Now, a couple last things here. I understand some folks here are going to have astigmatism. Honestly, I had no idea so many people had astigmatisms until I started shooting guns. I feel like the gun community is disproportionately affected by this, as I've only met like 2 people in my life with them outside of the gun community. But I also suppose astigmatism isn't a subject me and my homies are talking about very often, so I digress. If you have astigmatism, I'm sorry. Sometimes these optics aren't going to appear as crisp to people without them, so my apologies. Second, all night vision capabilities were tested under PVS 31, so I feel like we can accurately tell which sucks and which optics are decent. Starting with the Trijicon RCR. Good Lord have mercy. This thing will literally burn your eyes out on the brightest setting. This thing is wild, gentlemen. I sat there back and forth between all the optics, just holding them up to the sun, out at night, whatever. Across the board, the Trijicon is going to be able to shine in every single light condition possible. Okay, maybe not a nuke, but don't look into that light anyways. That's going to blind you. But you desert boys are going to be very appreciative of this thing. It's impressive how bright it is. That emitter is unreal. Honestly, when you have the brightness cranked too high, you kind of get the starburst effect because it is so bright. Now, the starburst effect, it's very, very minimal. And it's actually one of the least in the lineup of that starburst effect on the highest brightness. Outside, it's completely not even noticeable. It's when you get indoors, as the lights start shining, kind of this rear up and down kind of thing. But it's really not that big of a deal. You're going to crank it down once you get inside anyways, and it really doesn't obstruct your field of view. Now you have 10 different brightness settings. So if nuclear explosion isn't what you need, it's got you covered for sure. The dot is very, very crisp, especially under nods. They did a fantastic job. Moving forward to the aimpoint, it's fairly bright. One thing I'd really like to note is that on the highest setting, you have a very, very bad starburst effect. Sometimes it's noticeable outside, mostly not, but there is a huge glare of red that refracts and reflects like a prism across the glass indoors. Sometimes outside, depends on the lighting condition, but indoors it's very, very noticeable. If you're looking at this thing indoors on the highest brightness setting, it's going to be pretty bad. Now, it's not crazy bright either, which is also kind of interesting. You would think that huge starburst would have to do with it being super bright, but it's not. I guess it's just something to do with the prism. So let's move on to the Steiner. The Steiner MPS is very solid. There's a little bit less adjustments than some of them. So I think it's around 7 or 8 different settings. So it's really not that big of a deal breaker. 2 less than the best. So it's very bright. It's very crisp. You desert guys, you're going to be fine. People with nods, you're going to be fine. It does very well. Next is a cycle bear. It's pretty much a very dim optic, to say the least. By far the most dim in the lineup. I struggle just a touch on the brightest days here in the Midwest with the contrast on white steel targets. You desert guys will not appreciate this thing. Now what's kind of funny is it does have nod settings. It's kind of interesting because you think if you cheap out on a China pistol optic, your night vision is probably carrots, but I don't know. Just kidding, really. It's okay on nods. I don't hate it at all. It's the brightness that really hurts it. That dot is pretty crisp, but it's just it's just dim. Ultimately, I feel like there's 4 different settings that you can use during the day that are actually useful. The rest, you're not gonna see until very low light scenarios. Now finally, we have the Holosun. This one's kind of interesting because you have your choice of 3 different reticles. Now, in my garbage opinion, 2 of them really only make sense. However, I'll only be using 1. The first option is a large donut. The second, a donut with a dot in the middle and then just a dot. I suppose it's kind of cool to customize your reticle, but honestly for me, it's never leaving just the dot. I guess I can see some merit in the donut dot. It's huge, it's very easy to spot in your pistol presentation, and I guess that's nice because you can make whatever adjustments you need in the event your pistol presentation isn't perfect or your transition isn't perfect, and you gotta find that dot. But that's about the only time that I could see myself actually using this thing. It doesn't matter if it's on a pistol, a shotgun, a subgun. All I need is a single dot to tell me where I'm hitting. That's it. I genuinely do not need some massive blob of reticle to make hits and make accurate hits. And especially when shooting for accuracy and speed. I consider this kind of subjective. I mean, it can work for some folks, you know, hey, if you can shoot faster and suck less with it, heck yeah, do your thing, bro. But when I'm trying to clear like a plate rack or other super small targets for speed, transitions, whatever, I feel like that massive donut is doing nothing but causing me to get slower because it's actually giving me too much info, more info than I actually need. Even for that like CCW, oh crap, point shoot kind of scenario, I still don't need a massive 32 MOA reticle to get fast and accurate rounds on target. What's helping me do that is my practice and countless reps, making that pistol draw, that transition, that speed a second nature. That's what's done that for me. So I guess I can see some merit to it, but honestly, not much more than really, I guess, in my opinion, a gimmick. If this offends you, I'm sorry about that. DM me, I'll send you a participation trophy. But ultimately, just be better than needing a 32 MOA donut reticle. Your own self-security is worth it. Now, as far as brightness goes, it's pretty dim actually. Definitely wouldn't consider this crazy bright. It does okay, but it's definitely not crazy bright. One thing I genuinely dislike is the shake awake feature. I guess it's not necessarily the feature in itself, but how it's executed. First of all, the solution to shake awake and needing shake awake is changing your batteries more than once every 2 years because every single optic in this lineup has a battery life measured in literally years. If this is your duty weapon or your main CCW, just change your batteries to ensure that dot is always going to be there for you instead of a feature that can prolong battery life. Batteries are like $5, friend. You should never rely on trying to save $5, $10 once or twice a year. And if it does, then maybe you should just run irons instead. So I suppose the feature isn't dumb and worthless. I understand its merit. However, I don't believe on an optic that's battery life is again measured in years has much of a place. I'd rather run my battery dead once a week than ever once need my dot to work and the battery I let live in there for 4 years because it worked yesterday, because it's got this fancy shake awake thing, and it's not there when you need your dot. When you need your dot, you need it. There's absolutely zero give or take in that scenario. And while it's relatively seamless transition from the sleep mode to awake when it's in a well-lit area, if that thing is resting on your nightstand at night and you don't have a flashlight on your gun, it's not getting very bright at all, which in my opinion is a massive liability. Now, you don't need the solar power to have the dot function. They call it fail-safe. However, you would be far better off not trying to get an extra 69 cents of battery life out of it and just change it on a schedule that doesn't allow you to push anywhere near the limits of the battery life. Just change it. I understand the merit. I could see it being used, the shake awake feature on LPVOs or something like that, where I swear the batteries last 5 business minutes, but again on a pistol dot, with battery life that's measured in years, it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me, and I feel like it's more of a gimmick than anything. So gentlemen, let's wrap this up. Coming in at dead last, we have the Sealay Bear. It's just very meh performance, and to be quite honest, almost unusable in very bright conditions. At number 5, we have the aimpoint P2. The dot is relatively crisp. There's lots of starburst effects until you get to the right brightness settings. It's very interesting because when you are outside and you have it too bright, you get that starburst effect. but it can be fixed, just crank it down. But it's very bad indoors. It also has this very weird illumination effect where you will get inside the housing slightly illuminated red from the dot instead of just hitting that glass. It kind of reflects that light. I don't know the exact words for it, but it puts that light back through that tunnel to the user, and you can kind of see it in there. At number 4, we have the Holosun. The dot's crisp, but it's just not very bright, some gimmicks and such. Let's go into the next part of the lineup, the Steiner. It's very similar to the aimpoint all around. However, it's definitely brighter on max settings. Next is the lead and steel PB3. It features a very, very bright dot. Plenty of adjustments as well. The dot is solid. And at number 1, we have the Trijicon RCR. I genuinely cannot convey to you guys how bright this thing is. In the video, it's hard to describe, honestly. But no matter what lighting conditions there are, the Trijicon RCR absolutely positively has the best adjustment and the best range and the most crisp dot out of the entire lineup. One thing I'd like to add, under night vision, they all performed, well, to be honest, very well. They did what they needed to do. It doesn't feel like any of them did anything drastically better than the rest. All pretty solid in that aspect. Now, gentlemen, let's move on to what I would say is the absolute most important factor of any optic out there. Really, any piece of kit out there that you use and your safety and performance relies on it. Durability and reliability. I shouldn't really have to go too much more in depth than that because I believe reliability comes first and foremost, and the best mix of performance to suit your needs comes after your optic, your piece of kit's always working when you need it to. Now, when it comes to firearms, people often take this aspect very seriously, and there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with wanting and seeking out the most durable, the most reliable piece of kit possible. Even if it's something you rarely use, no matter what it is, when you need it, you just need it, period. And usually if you need your firearm, it's probably a relatively serious matter. So we're gonna test these guys in depth here, gentlemen. If this is your first rodeo at a 110 SAS testing ground, welcome aboard. It's gonna get a little fun. To all you other cool cats, welcome back. First, we're gonna do water. How weatherproof are these guys? Second, impacts and damage. Let's bang these things up. These optics are tools. They aren't some trophy mantelpiece. Treat it as such. You need to be able to potentially trust your life to this one day. Let's see if they handle themselves as such. And finally, after all that, we're gonna function test them. See if they hold zero, see if anything broke. So gentlemen, enjoy the little montage.
Probably should unload this, huh?
Well, let me have a rule and a saw and a board and I'll cut it. I'll climb up a ladder with a hammer and a nail and I'll nail it. Well,
Nice
we
one.
worked so hard to build a little house together. In the snow or the rain or the ice cold wind, whenever. No matter what the weather, we're together. Let me have a rule and a saw and a board and I'll cut it. Climb up a ladder with a hammer and a nail and I'll nail it. Well, we worked so hard to build a little house together. In the snow or the rain or the ice cold wind, whenever. No matter any weather, we're together.
So that was pretty neat. Let's go ahead and assess what damage may or may not have happened. First things first, I'm crazy surprised by these optics, all of them. It's really impressive. First, we bounced them off the glass of a car. I genuinely believe the car took more damage than the pistol dot. Each optic withstood that beating. I genuinely thought for sure at least one was going to break here, because while it may not look like I was making some crazy hard impacts, it absolutely was harder than any drop test and very localized to the optic housings and repeated impacts. Now, nothing is rattling around with them. All dots are functional. So we moved over to the frozen water. I broke up the ice in my little frog pond on the range here and tossed in the whole guns, lights and all. The temp at that time was like 26 degrees and I had to break up the ice there. So yeah, it's definitely pretty cold out and so was the water. So after I tossed them in there, we let them sit and marinate there for about 15 minutes or so. Then came back to the part of fishing them out. This wasn't very much fun and I actually lost the PB3 for a hot minute. So that poor guy was in there for at least a solid half hour. After inspection, all the optics were still in excellent working order, still, which is pretty well. But they do advertise them as being weatherproof. So I was expecting them to be fine, but kind of hoping something was going to break. I sat them on my gun bench overnight, untouched as well, in case water did get in and hadn't ruined them yet, fried anything just yet. And again, 0 issues of report. Pretty fair if I'm being honest. I was expecting at least one to go bad. In fact, I was kind of hoping. But before going into the water, I made sure each optic had their battery caps properly torqued down to ensure it would be an equal fight. Next, I took a set of stainless steel Leatherman multiplier tools straight to the glass, both to the front and to the rear, to mimic some direct impacts to rocks, debris, or little Debbie sprinkles, whatever it is. At this point, I thought for sure at least the sea lake bear would have a spider web. Nope. Literally, only damage to these optics was baby little nicks in the glass coatings and some very light scratches. 0 optics were compromised by this. I genuinely thought at this point something would have broke, but no. Stainless steel ain't nothing to me, man, these mailboxes said. So I was pretty unsatisfied at this point. I needed something to break, to honestly authenticate my testing. I don't care if it was my own heart that got broken or one of the guns, something needed to break. So I did some juggling. Then I bounced them off the hood of my car. More damage to the car than the optics. I wasn't easy on these things either. I genuinely wanted something to break. I needed something to break. Nope. As far as I could see, everything, it was in perfect working order. So what next? Well, obviously, I had to run them over. So I made a cute little mailbox lineup. Unbeknownst to the mail recipients, this could be their last day as a functional tool. I took my 2500 truck that weighs in probably around 6,500 to 7,000 pounds with myself in it and ran them over. No crunches heard, no tires popped from the glass shards. So I did it again until they were so buried into the ground that the truck wasn't even touching them anymore. So I went and picked them out. They were muddy, but that's the extent of the damage. So I went home. That was it, with my head held low, and the only thing broken was my heart. All emitters seemed to be in perfect working order. So next, we waited overnight, see if any water damage had occurred, mounted them back up, and see if they retained 0. Now, guys, this is where it got kind of interesting. Now, up until this point, I assumed all damage was superficial and strictly just cosmetic blimps. So I mounted them all up, went back out to the range and dumped a few mags into some trash like a proper gentleman would to mix up and stir anything that might have made it inside of the optics. Dirt, dust, debris, whatever. Nothing was super apparent after that. Of course, I was just dumping into trash, not aiming anything. So I swapped over to my plate rack. Now, I shot all of these optics from a bag at 15 yards, just like I had zeroed them, at the exact same place, exact same bag, exact same distance. All optics were cleaned of any mud in the plate, any debris in any of the clamps, screws, or whatever. Scrubbed them with a toothbrush to make sure there would be no outside factors other than the damage I may have caused them to ensure it would be a fair fight. Now, I expected each optic to at least have some slight, tiny bit of point of impact shift just from taking them on and off. But these are quality optics and quality mounts, and each optic was torqued to the correct specs per manufacturer and done so with an adjustable torque wrench. So I expected some shift, but extremely minimal shift. But let's talk about the results of that. Now first, the Holosun. While it does look like a fishbowl, it retained relative 0. It wasn't the original 0, however. It's safe to say the emitter had moved definitely a touch from the impacts, more than what remounting and mounting had done. Nothing too drastic, but definitely not super acceptable. It's about 3 inches to the right and about 2 inches low. The sea lake bear, well, that one was pretty rough. That one was 6 inches low. Windage was about a 1/2 inch to the right. The lead and steel was about an inch to the right and about a ½ inch low, so pretty decent. The aim point is one thing that surprised me the absolute most. I knew something was immediately up when I went to present my pistol. The small little platform inside was massively cockeyed, and this is what kind of controls the actual emitter inside there. Like to the point where this little emitter housing was actually in my line of sight. Sure enough, when I went to paper, it was nearly a foot to the left and nearly 6 inches low. At 15 yards, this is a huge change in point of impact. And to be quite frank, kind of unacceptable. The Steiner also had some point of impact change. It was about an inch to an inch and a half high and maybe a ½ inch to the left. Now, the RCR, this is what's most interesting. It maintained perfect zero throughout. Literally zero impact change to report. I was definitely expecting at least some sort of change with just taking it on and off. However, it held up great. The emitter in there, it must be pretty solid. So as a whole, it's interesting to see that honestly, all of these optics took considerable abuse, from direct impacts to the glass, being ran over, marinating in ice water, banged off glass and ice and steel, whatever. Everything we did to it. The fact that none of them were functionally compromised is honestly outstanding. But there is a real fault with these optics that have changed their point of impact. Every single optic except the Trijicon RCR. And let's be real. Most of this testing here is pretty unrealistic. I mean, sure, you may drop your pistol into concrete or something, but I just banged each one of these off glass, off steel, off a hood, ran them over twice, and then sunk them into water. That's honestly not your typical day at the range. But in order to try and expedite failures and get these things to show maybe a weak point, you gotta get kind of crafty. Then I thought, all of these optics had shifted except the RCR. So I was thinking, oh God, what if I actually broke these things? I didn't know it until now. Let's get these optics re-zeroed, shoot again, put a few mags through them, test if the zero still holds true. Make sure nothing inside was broken. Now, once again, I can say, no issues there. Each optic did return to zero and they held zero without wandering off. So at this point, I'm pretty stumped. Without creating some ultra unrealistic scenario of damage, I'd say that reliably, all of these optics have been pretty stout. So to judge these guys on reliability, it's ultimately gonna come down to the past and history of failures and their track record that's been reported by users that aren't myself. Now, the only problem with that is I wasn't there for those failures, and I'd be taking a stranger's word for it. And guess what? Every single piece of kit has failed at some point. I have a PSA upper that's lasted longer than a brand new out-of-box SR-15 upper that was leaking gas. I've also had Knight's rifles, like my main 11.5-inch carbine, I've had for like 8 years now and haven't had a single issue, while an LMT out of the box had a broken adjustable piston system. I once got a Schmidt & Bender that wouldn't even track right out of the box, while I have a China Bing Bong eBay special optic on my 22 that does just fine. In the end, it doesn't matter how much you spend on a piece of kit. Something will always go wrong when humans are making things. What spending more money really gets you is that R&D that went into creating that piece of kit, that optic, that firearm, and the significantly lower odds of getting something out of the box that doesn't work as intended. So, in conclusion, I can dig up photos that have been posted online of failed kits all day, and any flavor, any brand, doesn't matter. So I really want to try and base this and report on my own experience. And in my own experience, well, we've got some optics here that handled the abuse rather well, other than wandering zeros, which is obviously not a good thing, but not broken. Having a zero that's wandering is not only a safety issue, well, it's a downright dangerous thing to yourself, to your target, whatever. If your bullets aren't hitting where you intend them to go, that's not good. Now, for the sake of being thorough, we're going to report some of these other failures experienced by other users here in the community with some pictures and so on and so forth. And I'm certain folks want to hear about kit failing anyways, but just remember, this wasn't my own failure. We have extremely little context about the failures, but the damage that shows in the pictures makes it probably pretty obvious as to what happened. Also, one thing to keep in mind, the amount of aim points out there is literally tenfold to say what the Trijicon RCR is. So while I may have great luck with mine, it definitely could be an anomaly, and 2 years down the road, they all crap out. Now, I'm betting that won't be the case with Trijicon because it is a pretty solid brand and their optics has always been durable. But once again, you just never know. So first, my only personal failure out of the lineup is the Sea Lake Bear. I have 4 of these optics. 4. Not because I love them so much, but because that's how many it took to get them right. All of which, but one, had issues with flickering dots or simply just went dead. These failures can 110% be attributed to the battery containing ring here. They just came loose and no longer gave the battery that little pocket to stay in and give it a reliable power source connection. Now, this final bear here withheld the torture, just like the rest of them. Now, it did have a significant POI shift. However, it did return to 0 and maintain 0 after that. Now, the Steiner. While it sports one of the largest windows and some of the best glass in the lineup, reports of failure are something to think about. Most of the failures that I have seen can be attributed to the mounting system. Usually it's the clamp that fails on them and sends the optic sailing either back into the user's face or down range. To be honest, it's just not a great mounting system. However, FCD does make a fix for this with a little billet steel clamp that makes it much more secure and isn't going to tear off. It utilizes the acro footprint. The P2 also kind of suffers from this issue. Now with the Steiner, I've seen some pics of busted glass, some fogged up optics as well. Not at a terribly alarming rate, but I do have to say it's not an isolated incident, as I've seen glass fail in the same way multiple times. Moving forward to the aimpoint acro P2. Now just like the Steiner, I can report 0 functional issues other than a wandering dot. Now, they all wandered except the trijicon. The aimpoint, well, it was rather extreme, to the point I'd consider it a significant weak spot in this optic. Now, it returned to 0 and didn't shift after that firing schedule once it was re-zeroed. It's important to know that because obviously impacts changed this P2 0 a rather significant amount. Now, as far as reported failures that aren't my own, it's kind of safe to say, guys, these optics are failing at a relatively alarming rate. The amount of busted glass that's completely fallen off, sheared off mounting clamps, and fogged up lenses is legitimately worrisome. It legitimately doesn't take much at all to hop on any sort of social media, especially the gun pages like mid-tier snobs on Facebook. It's a pretty common occurrence to see a busted up aimpoint P2. It's not quite like the reputation of the super durable T2s and stuff like that. They're rifle optics that are absolutely king of red dot sights for carbines and SMGs. And what's interesting is it's seldom user inflicted damage, like dropping it. While I've seen a couple spiderweb from a drop, I feel like I have seen most just from legit shooting their gat and it spiderwebs, or the glass falls out, or the mount, breaks. So it seems like there's an inherent issue with the optic itself. Now, guys, I am not an engineer. I can't tell you exactly what needs fixed and what exactly is happening in this, but it also doesn't take a science rocketist to get the vibe that these things are failing at, well, kind of an alarming rate. To the point where if you can get past that paper straw field of view and the name that's been slapped on the side of it, it's a major concern that would make me really think twice about that optic. And the problem seems extremely hit and miss. There's plenty of P2 users out there with absolutely 0 issues to report. They've been ran them hard without any of the wandering issues, without any of the busted glass. I mean, I definitely don't have a ton of miles on mine, but they were hard miles, no doubt. They were at the drag strip, and mine's been great. So it seems extremely hit and miss. Now, guys, there's a lot of emotionally invested folks in their optics, and the aimpoint P2 gang is dedicated to the cause, it seems. And since aimpoint P2 is one of the most expensive closed emitter dots on the market until the RCR showed up, the hype train, it was full steam ahead. So it's tough to say other than what you see at face value. Now, for Holosun, talk about emotionally attached to their purchase, Lord Almighty. Now, that's not to say there isn't some merit to that. My Holosun, it performed great here in durability, but talk about hit and miss. The China Holosun is the king of that. When these optics first rolled out a few years ago, nobody, and I mean nobody, took these things seriously, and for good reason. When these things first rolled out, they were pretty much hot garbage, pretty much across the board. However, today, I do not believe that to be the case. A company that was once laughed at for being kind of the first to the game for budget pistol dots and having budget reliability now kind of has a decent little name for themselves, and in fact have rather expensive offerings now. And since they've established a decent little rep and reliability now, and there's a bajillion different models and flavors to choose from, all at a rather appealing price, it's time to probably take Holosun a little bit more serious. But here's the thing. busted glass, failed reticles, and just flat out non-functioning dots being shipped out at a rate that doesn't make me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Everybody and anybody who's been shooting knows someone with at least one Holosun failure. While they have drastically improved in the reliability category over the past few years, they're still just not at the level in which I can honestly say I'd trust my life to a Holosun dot over something like the others here in the lineup by companies that have been manufacturing for decades. Now, I didn't experience any failures with my Holosun, so it's very important to note that. And I believe that's a byproduct of them changing their mission. And that's awesome. Competition at the top level benefits all end users, period. But there's also the aspect of where the dot comes from. And that's China. While it doesn't bother most, it bothers a fairly decent amount of folks. And for good reason. China has never had a reputation of producing much of anything with a significant amount of attention to detail and quality control. And it just shows. Take for instance the users that actually get out, run their stuff, shoot a lot of rounds through their Holosuns. It's like 50-50. Half that report a bajillion rounds and no issues. And the other half say they're on their third one but don't mind because, well, it was cheap and I'm getting a free one to replace it. And that one's brand new in the box. So as a whole, I feel like it's kind of difficult to judge a company with such hit and miss horror stories. I suppose the best way to sum it all up is to just ask yourself, are you genuinely convinced you can trust your life, a China-made dot that you and I both probably know is made in a sweatshop in a country that has extremely loose patent infringement laws and are known for reverse engineering and intellectual theft? If that doesn't matter to you and you've never had an issue, you do you, my dude. If that bothers you and you steer clear of them because of that, you do you, my dude. But remember, keep that same energy when it comes to other Chinese-made things that I guarantee you use on a daily basis and turn a blind eye to, because you can't pick and choose which China stuff you like and don't like because one's a cheap alternative and the other is gun-related, so you have to scream America and boycott China gun products. If you choose to boycott that, heck yeah, absolutely, I'm on board with you, bro, and I'm 110% behind you. Just carry that same energy and support American across the board. That's a very respectable thing to do. Anyways, okay, tangent over. Let's talk about the PB3 by Lead and Steel. This is a very new optic put out by a very new company. It's going to be difficult to say whether or not this optic is going to last 10 days or 10 years. However, what I can say with confidence is that this optic not only had very minimal POI shift, but withstood everything I threw at it. In fact, guys, I was a little extra hard on this optic. It sat in that frozen pond twice as long as the rest of them. Now, mostly that's my fault because I couldn't find the booger in the muck, but I shot it more than the rest of them and gave it quite a few extra thwacks off that glass and off that steel hood, hoping it would break. Gotta say, for me, it's been a very stout little optic. I have zero complaints as far as durability goes. It took everything I threw at it and then some. Now, since this is a new optic, it's going to be difficult to judge on track record because there's just far less of them out there than the other brands. That's not to say there's none of them out there and I'm holding the only one. That's not the case. There's definitely quite a few that are out there being used and being used hard. And I haven't caught much wind of them being broken and causing issues. The sample size, though, is just smaller than most in the lineup. So let's go ahead and move on to the Trijicon RCR. Definitely the newest in the game in the lineup here. And what I'd say is the least amount of them out there in the wild. So just like the Lead and Steel, it's difficult to say. However, with Trijicon, it's slightly different than the Lead and Steel. They have an extensive track record, and their pistol dots go extremely far back. Think early GWAT days. Further back than really any of these dots here on the market in the lineup go. Now granted, they weren't all closed emitters back then, but they were still manufacturing pistol dots in that technology. And while there's definitely been failed RMRs and busted glass, it's not at an alarming rate, especially when you consider the sample size of how many Trijicon pistol dots are out there versus the aimpoint, versus the Steiner, versus the Holosun. There's easily tenfold the amount of Trijicon pistol dots out there versus anything else in the lineup. Let's just take my own experience with Trijicon, for instance. It was the only dot in the lineup with absolutely positively 0 point of impact shift. Some moved over a foot while Trijicon didn't budge. That's a very impressive feat. And to be quite frank, it's apparent they're doing something different than the rest. Now, let's speak on my own track record and experience. Did you guys see the RMR HD video? Granted, it's not a closed emitter, it's not the same dot, but I shot this thing with a shotgun, ran it over with a truck, drug it behind a tractor, drug it down the road for a mile, shot it underwater like 30 times and used it as a hammer. Not only did it still function perfectly, but it held perfect zero as well, just like the RCR. And that testing was way more ridiculous and way more unrealistic than what we did here, by far. So, while it could be a complete lemon from a year from now, it would probably be a pretty safe assumption that the RCR will fare very well down the road. So to conclude, durability. It's going to be a little different, a little bit difficult, but here at face value, none of these optics legitimately broke other than the Sea Bear. They all survived, so that's great really, but some of which did not fare so well when it came to getting beat up and taking those impacts. We had some optics shift an entire foot, and some didn't budge. While track record of these companies is going to go into this, it's a very, very, very small part, and I'm going to be basing this mostly off the wandering reticles that couldn't withstand the impacts, therefore shifted the reticle, shifted your point of impact, because let's be real, while it didn't break, that's a legitimate point of failure and is a safety issue because your gun isn't shooting where you think it should be shooting. So, gentlemen, let's start. So at the bottom, gentlemen, we have the Sea Bear. While it made it through the torture testing, we had 3 of them fail just from shooting. So guys, that's an obvious loss. We have to put that at the bottom. At number 5, we're going to put up the Holosun. We had a pretty decent POI shift and a very, very hit and miss track record. While this one survived the torture, so did the rest of them. Now guys, at number 4, we have the aimpoint P2, an absolutely unacceptable foot of POI shift at 15 yards. Not only is this a legitimate safety issue, but kind of showcases a weak point in the build quality of the aimpoint P2. At number 3, I'm gonna put the lead and steel. It made it through everything just fine. While it still had a point of impact shift, it was very small, and you're still gonna clear a plate rack at 15 yards with this thing if you do your part, despite the wandering reticle. This optic can't be at the top though, because the company essentially has a very small sample size with little track record to reference from. While there are some of them out there, the company doesn't have a very deep track record. And I can't honestly put this company ahead of some of them, even ones that have some failures, because guess what? We just don't know just yet. At number 2, we're going to do the Steiner. It had a very little POI shift, but it held up extremely well. The glass also, one thing I'd like to note, had the least amount of scratches and dings in the coating. So we're going to put that at number 2. And of course, at number 1, we have to put the Trijicon RCR because guys, it took the damage like a champ. It had 0 POI shift. It's the clear winner as they're doing something everyone else isn't doing when it comes to protecting the zero of your dot from impacts, frozen water, trucks, and just general tomfoolery. So let's move on to the final segment here, guys. Drip and Gucci points. Just kidding. That doesn't matter. Run your gun, not your mouth. You know what's way cooler than an RCR or a P2 or any sort of expensive optic riding on a $6,000 Nighthawk pistol? Old boy shooting a $290 PSA dagger with a Sea Bear better than that guy with $15,000 in his guns. Remember, let your performance and results speak for itself. Gucci points doesn't matter. So let's do a quick recap here and get back on track. Gentlemen, we have taken the best of the best and closed emitter dots on the market here, subjected them to some real damage and critiqued them pretty daggone harsh. And guess what? That's okay. It's okay to be critical of expensive gear. We all should be. And problems with expensive gear should be exposed. When companies whose buyers aren't aware of their failures or vice versa, guys, nobody benefits from that. And the best way to get a better product is from your wallet. And if the well dries up at XYZ brand company, they have 2 options if you're not spending money with them. Be better and fix it, or quit. You as a consumer have a tremendous amount of power over these companies that provide us with products simply if you choose not to consume their products and instead spend your money at their competitors. You, your friends, your range buddies literally feed these people. So next time you hear folks screaming about shut up about an issue and just call customer service and said, don't say anything. Remember, your knowledge is buying power for everyone else. And maybe you can save somebody $1 down the road. Now, obviously, guys, this isn't me saying go scream at everyone XYZ brand is trash because you had an issue with their product, because your sample size of 1 isn't a conclusive result and doesn't reflect the company as a whole. If they handle your problem and your issue well, and the problem is resolved swiftly, it's just as much as your job to tell folks about the great and swift resolution that you got, as much as it is as showing your failures. So, with that in mind, JDs and Lettleman, Hosses and Hossets, let's get to the final ratings. Let's do this. Coming in at number 6, we have the Steiner Bear. Between the awful eye box, the awful glass, the super dim dot, and the failures, guys, there's just not much to be said about this optic. Maybe in time it'll become better, but for now, I can't say that I'll be running one of these on my guns. At number 5, guys, this is gonna hurt some feelers, but it's gonna be okay, I promise. It's the aimpoint P2 acro. The glass, it's okay, but that's about the extent of its greatness. It has a very meh kind of mounting system that's known to fail with its aluminum clamp instead of something like a solid billet steel. It has a very spotty track record with essentially zero rhyme or reason behind all the fogged up lenses, all the cracked up glass, other than maybe it's just an inherent design flaw or a QC issue. Either way, for the price that they demand for this optic, it lacks far too much in track record and the field of view of a Harrell to rate it any higher on this list. Of all the closed emitter dots in this list, this is the only one I found to actually be difficult to do some more dynamic and fast shooting. The ultra small glass, guys, it gives you a terrible tunnel effect and simply put, leaves you searching for that dot far too often. Now guys, I am absolutely positively not the world's greatest pistol shooter. I'm definitely not a novice here either. And the times I lost that dot, shooting and scooting, makes it feel like it's just not an acceptable choice. Not to mention, it wasn't even the brightest dot and an unacceptable point of impact shift with the damage that it took. Number 5, the aimpoint P2. Now coming in at number 4, I'm gonna go with Holosun. What the Holosun does well is the larger and forgiving field of view. A relatively crisp reticle that's moderately bright and has a great profile for a closed emitter red dot. It's really a great size and minimal wasted space on the top of your gun. However, for what it does well, it lacks tenfold. We had a serious POI shift. We have a proprietary mounting system, and we have undoubtedly the worst glass quality out of all of the lineup, period. When you think of good glass, the best you can get is simply looking out your back window. It's crisp, it's flat, and everything you see as if you aren't looking through glass at all and you're just standing there. The Holosun, it's simply not that. The amount of distortion and fisheye is unparalleled in the lineup. Again, it's like 1.1 magnification in the dead center and 0.9 magnification as you get closer to your edge. Simply put, guys, the glass isn't very high quality. Even if you look past the very spotty reliability record, it's apparent that the glass quality is absolutely sacrificed in this optic. And to be honest, the price doesn't reflect that quality of glass that you have in it. Now, the solution for this is don't focus on the glass. Focus on the target. Both eyes should be open and the dot should be on the target you see, not focused on how the target appears in the glass. And yes, that's absolutely correct. Couldn't have said it any better myself. However, why does that sound like ultra mega coat for trash glass? Because while that's absolutely true and correct way to shoot your pistol dot, it doesn't change the fact that the glass is less than great. It was so apparent that I thought maybe I had some weird epiphany when I first took that Holosun out to the range. No, it's just that noticeable on the Holosun compared to even the Steiner Bear, which is much cheaper. And then it brings the next question. Clearly they could use better glass, but why don't they? So, what else could they possibly be sacrificing internally that we can't see until it goes dead in a couple years or a couple days, a couple weeks down the road? Maybe it's all starting to come around here now with the Holosun China business model. So while it survived torture testing and has a rather forgiving field of view, there's just too much sacrifice and the optic has no business costing what it does. While I legitimately take this over an aimpoint P2, guys, it's by a razor thin margin that ultimately came down to a more forgiving field of view and not having to go searching for my dot nearly as often. If the dot's gonna stay on, I'd like to have the Holosun over that aimpoint. Now you may say, the Holosun, it has so many more features than everything else. Did that technology and those features come into play? People scream, oh my God, I can do so much more. Yes, that did come into play. And to be honest, they're all more of a gimmick more than anything else. You have to ask yourself, what do they legitimately do to improve yourself as a shooter and your capabilities in maximizing your performance and getting fast and accurate shots on target. Because at the end of the day, whether it's a match or your life on the line, that's all that really matters. Being faster than the other guy and being more accurate. Those gimmicks improve neither of those things. And if they do, it's extremely marginal, to the point where it just doesn't really matter. So now breaking into the top three. Well, I feel like we kind of have a little bit of a tie between number 3 and number 2. Both of these optics, guys, they have an unreal field of view and by far the largest out of the entire lineup of close emitters. Both of which have very bright dots as well that you're not going to struggle to find on days of 100 UV index. Both have extremely flat glass and very minimal distortion. While both had some POI shift during the abuse section, it was smaller than the rest, and that's very important. Staying on target, again, is very important. But since we can't have a tie and drive the folks mad, we'll have to declare who's taking number 3 and who's taking number 2. Now, this is honestly a really hard call because every optic in the top 3, guys, in my opinion, are high quality optics. Each of these optics I'd consider buying again and using for whatever scenario I need them to. Actually, let's put it this way. All optics in the top 3 I would buy. I would own them. So you really can't go wrong with either. However, you gotta pick one. So gentlemen, at number 3, we're gonna go with the lead and steel PB3. This optic surprised me so much. The glass, it's flat, it's crisp, and it's huge. It's by far the largest eye box in the lineup, not to mention it's priced extremely well. But there's a kind of a small downside to it. It's just new to the game. There simply isn't a huge sample size out there like there is with everything else, excluding the Sealy, cycle, whatever. We can simply only speak in absolutes on reliability by how it withstood the abuse portion. And as I said, it held up great. Glass was clean and everything was functional and it was intact. While I myself personally like this optic more than like the Steiner MPS, I rightfully can't place it higher on the list than the Steiner because again, we just have myself in a very small sample size to pull from, while Steiner has a significantly larger one. Not to mention, guys, it had a pretty small POI shift, so that's great. So moving on, gentlemen, we have come to the final 2. It's honestly been a blast getting this far. And now that we're here, I want to thank you guys for watching. You guys are absolutely the best. So for the winner, I'm going to announce that first. It was made pretty clear from early on which one it was going to be. One just simply stood out much more than the rest with the absolute best blend of glass quality, field of view, dot brightness, build quality, ease of use, track record, and profile of the optic housing. Simply put, the best closed emitter red dot sight on the market. It's the Trijicon RCR. By far the most user-friendly out of the entire lineup. The buttons are huge and you can't be missed, yet it still takes an intentional effort to use them. The dot is the cleanest and most crisp in the lineup, while also absolutely positively the most bright with a huge range of adjustments. This thing is legit, so much obviously brighter than the rest without making it look like a giant blob in the middle for a reticle. The mounting system, I'm not gonna lie, it's a little goofy, but it's really not that bad. Slide the screws into the little slots, press it down onto your plate, grab a small Allen key and twist. It's really that simple and it doesn't take really that long. And what's great is it utilizes probably the most common footprint out there, the traditional RMR footprint. You can change your point of impact with just your thumbnail, or a spent case and some trash that you found on the ground, or the tool that it comes with. While the glass isn't the absolute largest in the lineup, it's crisp with minimal distortion and doesn't leave me playing where the F is Waldo. It has a good profile that's extremely similar to the Holosun and a very simple metal battery cover cap. And a very important thing is 0 point of impact shift through all the abuse it took, which in my opinion is absolutely outstanding, especially considering every other optic in the lineup had at least an inch of movement. Some almost a foot. The Trijicon RCR simply has the best blend of all factors that go into what makes a closed emitter great. So now let's talk about number 2, the Steiner. Guys, this is a phenomenal optic. It has a huge field of view, excellent German glass, crisp and bright dots, simple controls, and it does everything very well. Ultimately, what kept it from that number 1 spot is that acro mounting system that's prone to failure and some hit and miss issues with its track record. The rates of failure haven't been an alarming amount, and considering its actual performance as an optic, it really solidifies its spot at number 2. So gentlemen, we have a wrap on closed emitter battle royale. I hope you guys enjoy this. Gentlemen, I put a lot of time and effort into this, and a decent chunk of change as well. Not to mention the fact that I nearly flushed 300 to 750 bucks down the drain every time those boogers thwacked off the hood of the truck. But at the end of the day, I do it again for you guys. I appreciate each and every single one of you guys that made it this far. So do me a favor, guys. Let's blow this channel up. Reach as many folks as we possibly can with this. And until next time, Kings, XOXO, Gossip Girl.